Well, it's several things. I mean, we have to sort of acknowledge that in part this must be some kind of reaction to the lockdown, or whatever one's views on that, that there has been this sort of feeling in every country where there's been a lockdown that, people are going to let off energy. And, at such times you discover what the sort of sacred causes are of the time. In the UK, we had lockdown in order that we protected the National Health Service. But actually, the Black Lives Matter movement basically broke the lockdown for everybody because it was made clear that there are some causes even more important than the NHS in the UK. So what we're seeing is a sort of assertion of what the absolutely core values of our societies are, or think that they are. And in most of our countries, the one that everyone can agree on is anti-racism. The big problem is that the Black Lives Matter movement isn't just an anti-racist movement. It makes all sorts of assertions about our societies, which I think our societies cannot go along with. It makes all sorts of demands, which we just can't go along with. And the main thing is, and we saw that in these extraordinary clips you've just shown, the main thing is people who have downloaded into their systems a totally false idea of the societies that they live in. I mean, those women just there were deranged, and they weren't just acting up for the cameras, although that's something we do have to bear in mind. A lot of these people are doing stuff for it to be on, Facebook and so on. But it's not just that. They are deranged because they have an idea about the country they are in that is false. It isn't the case, as people have just asserted in recent weeks with just enormous ease, that the American police just go around killing black people whenever they like. It's just not the case. There are all sorts of problems with policing in the US, but it's not the case what's being said about the US. And it certainly isn't the case that you can take a specific criticism of the US police and use it to claim not only that the British police and the Australian police are racist, but that our entire societies are based on bigotry. It's just not the case. So these people are railing and screaming and frothing at the mouth about something that is not true.
Rita.
Well, where does this intellectual dishonesty come from? Because a lot of these protesters, a lot of these activists are educated. I would argue they're educated but largely ignorant. But
Yes.
Where does this vacuousness come from, where they just seem to be bereft of facts and perspective?
Well, I mean, you quite rightly point to the fact that these are people who, to some extent, have been educated into imbecility at some cost to their parents or to the state. They have gone to universities that have made them stupider by the time they come out than they were when they went in. They've imbibed a whole set of jargon. I've written about all this in The Madness of Crowds. I had to read this gunk. And the central texts that these people rely on are so flimsy that they should be laughed at. Texts like that by the white woman, Robin DiAngelo, called White Fragility, that now goes everywhere. Yeah. This does an enormously dishonest move. And this is the move. It says white people are all racist, and so incredibly racist that they just can't not be racist. Now, a white person who says, hang on a second, I don't think I am a racist, is then accused of white fragility. So the white fragility is an explanation of racism. So what we have here is a game set up for everybody to lose, and we can't play the game. We have to identify that's what's going on.
Douglas, just quickly before James asks you something, we're going to be talking to Lawrence Fox shortly, later in the show, and he was a victim of precisely that. He stood up and said, no, I'm not racist, and Britain is not a racist country, and look what's happened to him. You've written about that.
Yeah, I mean, the case of Lawrence Fox is really interesting because he said something that most people in Britain agree with, which is that actually we're a tolerant country. And for that, the far left and grievance mongers went around saying, well, this was some kind of racist incident. To say that we're not racist is racist. That's another example of what I just said. It's this deliberately false and untrue game, an impossible game to win. And that's what they said about Lawrence Fox. Now, by the way, I mean, the far left says all sorts of things all the time. We have in the UK a Cambridge professor now who tweeted out this week the phrase, white lives don't matter. Now, that is racism, as it would be if somebody, I mean, I can't think of somebody in public life who'd say this, but if somebody said black lives don't matter, I mean, what a reprehensible person that would be. Or somebody who said, Indian lives don't matter. What a horrible person. And here is a professor at one of our great universities is using social media to say white lives don't matter. And you think, what's gone wrong here? And what's happened is that the view the general public holds, and I think this, I haven't been to Australia for 18 months or so, but I think it's the same in Australia as it is here in Britain. Most of us think, look, we have faults, sure, but we're pretty decent societies. Actually, it's hard to point to more decent ones. So when somebody says, even saying that is racism, we object. And in the current era, they say, no. Well, if you object, that's just more evidence of your racism. So I just urge people, find out the game we're being invited to play and make sure you don't fall into playing it.
Absolutely. James.
So I wanted to come back, Douglas, to this idea of what's happening in our universities with all of this, because this does seem to be the epicenter of it, and it's now spilling out onto the streets. How much do you reckon this and what we're seeing now is a factor of the economics of it? Essentially, we're producing so many people with degrees that actually can't do anything useful in the real world. Were promised high-status jobs which simply don't exist anymore. And now, after lockdown and everything like that, we see an economy that's been largely devastated. So we're now seeing kind of a civil war on the left. Do you think that this sort of elite overproduction has anything to do with it? And is what we're seeing really a fight to control the entire left narrative? Because we see it in publishing and in media and everything, that everybody has to now agree the same thing, lest they themselves be canceled.
That's right. We just saw last week a few totally unknown authors say they were resigning from their literary agency because their literary agent represents J.K. Rowling, and J.K. Rowling had said that biological women are a thing, such a thing. And again, I mean, everybody knows this. Everybody in the general public knows this, and yet that expression of a totally obvious fact is presented by these mad activists as some kind of expression of deep bigotry by the Harry Potter author. So what's going on is, yes, you're absolutely right to put your finger on that. In a country like Britain, it was the aspiration, it's now been achieved, for 50% of the population to go to university. I never understood why 50% of the population needed to go to university. There are lots of jobs they could do that would be more productive for society. But, the joke I used to make was, after they've done their degree and build up tens of thousands of pounds of debt for their degree in post-performative lesbian dance activities, they'll go out into the real world and discover there aren't any jobs for post-performative lesbian dance. But here's the thing: the joke turns out to have been on all of us, because there were jobs for these people. They've gone into the HR departments of corporations. They've filled up the publishing industry. They've packed the media in all of our countries. And so it's the rest of us that are now having to answer to this generation of unemployable people who have been employed. And what's the response in recent weeks to the Black Lives Matter thing? But corporation after corporation saying they're going to double down on this stuff. They're going to require more diversity officers and so on. And so, this is a problem we all have.
We haven't seen much leadership from Boris Johnson. Douglas.
That's true. There is an explanation, which was that he was, of course, very ill with the coronavirus. He was in intensive care for a period, and it's said by people, I haven't seen him since this has happened, so I can't say with any personal knowledge, but it's said that it has knocked it out of him. It's taken a while for him to get back on form. I hope he is now. People sort of pretty much say he is over the last week or so. But I mean, it's been enormously disappointing that Boris Johnson has enormous attributes as a politician. And if he cannot stand up and unify the country in objection when, mad activists clamber over the cenotaph to the dead of the world wars and graffiti it repeatedly, and then try to bring down the statue of Winston Churchill in Parliament Square and graffiti us. If Boris Johnson, who who I think one can safely say doesn't mind comparisons between him and Winston Churchill. If Boris Johnson can't stand up for his great political hero, then, you know, we're in real trouble. But it comes back to this central thing in all of our countries. We are being told that we have to basically upgrade our societal software, and that Black Lives Matter and other radical organizations can help us do it. And my advice is no. I've read this stuff. I know about this stuff. The reason I wrote The Madness of Crowds was to try to get other people to get, as it were, faster through this nonsense to understand what we're dealing with. But what this all is not an upgrade of our societal software. It's malware. It's designed to derange our societies. It's designed to bring the whole thing down. What else is this nonsense talk of the privilege hierarchy? Nobody knows what the hell this thing is. You can't work out where anybody is on it any hour from 1 hour to the next. And these presumptuous postgraduates have said that the game of life is to work out who's got privilege and who isn't, and squeeze it from the people who have and give it to the people who haven't. And this isn't a recipe for societal harmony. It's a recipe for societal breakdown. We have to realize what these people really intend. And as one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter said just last week, she and her co-founder are, quote, trained Marxists. I mean, I don't know what the hell an untrained Marxist is, but they say they are trained Marxists, so we should believe them.
Absolutely, Douglas.
We will make America great again.